So welcome everybody. I still see people dropping in and entering the room, so I will wait a couple of more seconds. All right, so welcome everybody to the Ayahuasca for Mental Health track. I think it's a really fascinating topic, and to have so many talks today about ayahuasca as well from many different perspectives. And I think this was also a very interesting combination. Both are really focused on the clinical applications for ayahuasca. So we have two speakers here, and the first speaker is Milan Scheidecker, and unfortunately he will not be here for Q&A, so we will only have the Q&A with Fernanda. But we have his presentation pre-recorded. I think he is somewhere in the mountains, and his connection might not be good enough to join us at the moment. So we are sorry for that. But let me introduce Milan first. So Milan Scheidecker, he has an academic background in medicine, neuroscience, philosophy, and psychiatry. And he was trained in functional and molecular neuroimaging at the Institute for Biomedical Engineering in Zurich. And after that, he studied many different psychedelics and the potential clinical applications of those substances. And currently is also working on a project with Pharma Ayahuasca for, I'm not sure actually for which indication, but I'm sure he will tell you more about it in the talk. So welcome, Milan. And I'm looking forward to the talk, and see you all after the talk for the Q&A.
Good evening. My name is Milan Scheidecker. I'm currently heading the Psychedelic Research and Therapy Development Group at the University of Zurich. Our main goal is to investigate the potential of Pharma-Ayahuasca to enhance brain plasticity and psychotherapeutic learning. Based on the findings from our neuropharmacological research, we are developing novel transformation-based treatments for affective disorders. There is an ongoing controversy surrounding the efficacy of currently available antidepressants. According to a recent meta-analysis, antidepressants seem to work only marginally better than placebo. The effects are slowly evolving, and many patients suffer undesired side effects and do not reach symptom remission even after trials on numerous medications. Therefore, I think that there is an enormous need for faster and more effective therapeutic solutions. The discovery of the rapid-acting antidepressant effect of ketamine fueled the search for novel drug targets for mood disorders. Compared to conventional antidepressants, ketamine has a much faster onset of action. Already a single administration reduces symptoms of depression for the duration of 1 week. Compared to the transient effects of ketamine, psilocybin, the active ingredient of magic mushrooms, showed more sustained improvements in depressive symptoms, even several weeks after a single administration. Psilocybin is structurally related to DMT, the active ingredient of ayahuasca, a plant medicine that is used by indigenous people in South America. First evidence suggests that ayahuasca has a comparable potential to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. The FDA in the US approved ketamine nasal spray for the treatment of depression. However, ketamine has several disadvantages compared to other psychedelics. Psilocybin, for example, shows more sustained treatment response and has no addictive abuse potential. Compared to psilocybin, ayahuasca has the advantage of no tolerance induction, so it can be given several times per week, which allows more flexible treatment protocols. So far, no signs of toxicity have been found for long-term use of ayahuasca or psilocybin, which is not the case for ketamine, for example. Traditionally, ayahuasca is consumed in the Amazon as part of indigenous rituals. Nowadays, it becomes increasingly popular also in the West. Many tourists travel to the Amazon seeking transformative experiences that support personal development and psychospiritual growth. Searching for the term ayahuasca on Google Books reveals a dramatic increase in wording over the last 20 years, and an increasing numbers of studies report beneficial effects on physical and mental health. The psychotropic effects last for about 3 to 5 hours and include a state of introspection with increased awareness, dreamlike visions, and geometric patterns. Sometimes intense emotions and autobiographical memories can be evoked. If the subject is able to surrender, this challenging initial phase is usually followed by emotional relief, insightful reflections, and states of self-transcendence with changed outlook on life. Contrary to other psychotropic drugs such as opioids, benzodiazepines, or antipsychotics that narrow the field of consciousness, ayahuasca usually increases the level of mental clarity and emotional awareness. In this way, difficult emotions and thought patterns can be recognized, restructured, and integrated, especially when embedded in an ongoing process of psychotherapy. The effects of ayahuasca parallel the adaptogenic activity of other herbal medicines with polyvalent beneficial effects on physical and mental health. Conceptually, adaptogens are stress response modifiers that non-specifically increase an organism's resistance to various influences and promote adaptation to the environment. The pharmacology of ayahuasca is a typical example of the multi-target action of adaptogens and may be suited for the systemic treatment of complex diseases where conventional reductionist approaches have been disappointing. The broad range of beneficial effects include immunomodulatory, neurotrophic, and neuroprotective, as well as antidepressant, anxiolytic, and anti-addictive properties. Increased levels of cognitive flexibility, emotion regulation, and mindfulness could be useful in psychotherapeutic environments. As the taste of traditional ayahuasca is unpleasantly bitter and induces temporary vomiting and diarrhea, we have tested various doses and combinations of pure isolates of DMT and harmine in our pharmahuasca studies at the University of Zurich. DMT is a structural analog of serotonin and is widely found in nature, including plants, mammalian organisms, and human brains and body fluids. To prevent degradation in the body, DMT needs to be combined with different beta-carbolines that act as selective reversible MAO-A inhibitors. The effects produced by classical psychedelics such as DMT, LSD, or psilocybin are mediated through the serotonergic 5-HT2A receptor. When these receptors are activated, the neurotransmitter glutamate is released, which increases the excitability of the prefrontal cortex and induces an altered state of consciousness. Interestingly, ketamine shares a similar mechanism and increases glutamatergic signaling and synaptic plasticity via the blockage of NMDA receptors. These changes in neurotransmission lead to a state of acutely destabilized brain connectivity, habitual patterns of communication break down, and overall network flexibility is increased. This allows patients to break out of rigid and dysfunctional brain states and reach higher level of psychological flexibility. Patients that suffer from depressive rumination and negatively biased sense of self usually show pathological activity in what's known as the brain's default mode network. This network has been related to processes that create our sense of self. After the administration of ketamine, psilocybin, or ayahuasca, the activity and connectivity in the default mode decreases, which corresponds to the drug-induced state of ego dissolution. Interestingly, we have also found that meditators have an increased capacity to downregulate brain connectivity in the default mode network during meditation after taking psilocybin in a mindfulness retreat. Participants that took psilocybin during a 5-day meditation retreat showed stronger mystical experiences and increased levels of mindfulness compared to the placebo group. The intensity of the drug-induced state of self-transcendence was related to the persistent effects measured 4 months after the retreat, which include positive changes in attitudes, mood, pro-social effects, and behaviors. Participants from the psilocybin group reported increased appreciation for life, self-acceptance, spirituality, quest for meaning, and concern for others. From a therapeutic perspective, the attenuation of ego boundaries can lead to a temporary release from clinical symptoms. With progression towards breakthrough states of ego dissolution, therapeutic transformation or unlearning of previously conditioned self-referential behaviors is facilitated. Psychedelic experiences could therefore enhance metacognitive awareness and open plasticity windows for psychotherapeutic transformation. Based on these considerations, psychedelics provide alternative treatment options when conventional approaches have failed. The current paradigm is essentially based on daily pharmacological substitution of neurotransmitters in the brain, for example with SSRIs. In contrast, psychedelics provide more than just molecular drug targets. They induce altered states of consciousness that support transformative processes. The effect is comparable to a catalyst that accelerates phase transitions from a rigid maladaptive into more flexible and adaptive states. Many depressed patients suffer from the tendency to be trapped in a negative mood state and the inability to disengage from it. Transformation-based treatments are therefore less focused on the substitution of these depressive states, but on empowering the intrinsic capacity of the patient to reach more adaptive states that can be further stabilized by psychotherapy. In order to better understand those mechanisms of action, we test how specific compounds from ayahuasca can be used for the pharmacological augmentation of psychotherapeutic change processes such as cognitive flexibility, emotion regulation, and psychotherapeutic learning. The treatment approach with psychedelics is not primarily aimed at the management, the elimination, or control of symptoms of a particular mental disorder. It is more process-oriented and trans-diagnostic and follows the concept of salutogenesis by activating resources and general coping strategies. In this review, we have summarized the results from clinical and non-clinical studies with psychedelic and entheogens, with a particular focus on acute and long-term beneficial effects on well-being, empathy, cognitive flexibility, personality, and mindfulness. We found that the effects of psychedelics are particularly well suited to pharmacologically augment therapeutic process variables from the field of positive psychology. Now, what are the future challenges when we adopt an indigenous practice such as ayahuasca into a Western biomedical context? We know that the effects of psychedelics are highly context dependent and a suitable setting needs to be provided. In non-clinical indigenous or psychospiritual settings, altered states of consciousness are usually experienced in group rituals or ceremonies. During the process of loosening of ego boundaries, the ritual provides a safe space for the loss of conscious control and encourages mutual social support and emotional bonding among participants. The challenge of how a traditional indigenous practice can be translated into the Western world remains. I'm advocating here for a pragmatic knowledge transfer that doesn't require adopting the entire ceremonial context and belief systems for the medicine to work properly. If we allow different cultures and approaches to merge, there is true chance for discovery and innovation. I'm confident that we will find ways to adapt the traditional setting to achieve beneficial outcomes in the Western biomedical context, as long as the intention is driven by the common goal to reduce human suffering. To address these questions, we are conducting a research program at the University of Zurich that is supported by the Reconnect Foundation, a nonprofit organization based in Switzerland. So far, we have extracted DMT and harmine from ayahuasca analog plants and assessed their safety and tolerability in healthy subjects. Next, we will investigate the biomechanisms using multimodal imaging and test the clinical efficacy of pharmahuasca to support psychotherapy for affective disorders. As the progression of our studies was delayed due to COVID, data collection and analysis is still ongoing. As I'm currently spending my vacation in the Swiss mountains, I may not be able to participate in the live discussion. But I'm happy to answer your questions via email. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you an inspiring continuation of this conference.
So thank you very much, Milan, for that presentation. It's really unfortunate that you're not here. You might be watching this back at some point. I think it was a really interesting presentation with a lot of interesting visualizations also why ayahuasca could be beneficial for psychiatric disorders. And I really like the term transformation-based treatment. It's an interesting concept, I think. So now we will move on to Fernanda Paljano Fontes. I hope I pronounce your name in the right way. So Fernanda is an electrical engineer with 2 degrees from both a university in Brazil and a university in France. And she, in her master's program, she used fMRI to evaluate the acute effects of ayahuasca. And during her PhD, she investigated therapeutic potential of ayahuasca in patients with treatment-resistant depression. So I'm looking very much forward to your talk. I've read both of your papers, and I think it's a very interesting study. So I'm looking forward to what you have to share right now. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to share my screen. So, yeah, are you seeing?
Not yet.
Yes.
No.
No. Wait. So here.
Yeah, no, it's coming.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, so hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and to share with you some of new findings from this randomized placebo-controlled trial we conducted here in Natal, in the University of Rio Grande do Norte, Brazil, with ayahuasca to treat treatment-resistant depression a few years ago. So ayahuasca as many of you may already know, is the psychedelic brew from Amazonia origin that has an extensive indigenous and syncretic use, and that can be prepared in different ways. But here, what I'm referring to ayahuasca is the decoction made from the leaves of the Psychotria viridis with the bark of the Banisteriopsis caapi. So when you mix these two plants together, what we have is from one side, this DMT and NDMT, which is a serotonin agonist and psychedelic tryptamine. And on the other hand, we have these beta-carbolines, which are monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So I said before, DMT, when taken orally, is normally degraded by the monoamine oxidase enzyme from our stomach. But then when we take together with these MAO inhibitors, this molecule will prevent the DMT to be degraded and to reach our central nervous system, provoking all these effects. It's important to mention also that the beta-carbolines by themselves also have a central effect, as they can increase the availability of monoamine neurotransmitters in the brain. So when someone is under the acute effect of ayahuasca, they can experience a lot of effects. These effects normally start 20 minutes after ingestion, peaks around 1 and 2 hours, and subsided after 4 hours. These effects can, at early stages, include some changes in body temperature perception, numbness, body lightness. Also, an important part of the process is the purging, when you have like nausea and vomiting, and also the visual phenomena, which are very known. This visual phenomena usually happens with the eyes closed, and the pattern, it can be from simple patterns as geometric patterns to complex scenes as in a dream. We also have important changes in cognition. So we have changes in thought processes, increase in awareness, changes in mood, affect, emotion, changes in the way we perceive space and time and reality. In addition to all these acute effects, some open label Brazilian studies also have shown that ayahuasca could help alleviating depressive symptoms in patients with treatment-resistant depression. So in order to further investigate this effect, we conducted this randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial here in Natal. So here you can see the trial pipeline. The whole experimental session lasted 4 days, and we performed several evaluations 1 day before dosing session, during dosing session, 1, 2, and 7 days later. These evaluations included psychiatric scales, neuropsychological tests, fMRI acquisition, EEG, saliva and blood collection, and sleep EEG. So here, the most important finding of this study is that ayahuasca has a rapid and sustained antidepressant effect. So as we can see here in this graph, so in the x-axis, we have the time from the baseline, 1, 2, and 7 days after dosing. And here in the y-axis is the depression severity assessed by this psychiatric scale, the MADRS scale, and higher numbers indicate more severe symptoms. In blue, we have the placebo group, and red, ayahuasca group. So we can see that already one day after dosing, we have this great drop in the depressive symptoms, which lasted 7 days. It's also important to note that the between groups difference is even more pronounced 7 days later. We also performed a secondary analysis on this data in a collaboration with Rick Zeifman, who is also presenting here in ICPR. And we performed the secondary analysis to evaluate the impact of ayahuasca on suicidality. Although in this case, we could not find a significant between group effect, we do observe an important reduction in suicidality, also starting one day after dosing, and that's sustained for 7 days. So, but in both cases, looking for suicidality only or in depression in a more general way, what we are seeing are subjective scales. So one question that arises is what is happening in a physiological level? So in order to answer this question, we performed some investigation in biochemical markers that are related to depression. So in this first study, we analyzed cortisol levels. Cortisol is a hormone which is related to stress, and that's normally dysregulated in patients with depression. And we observed that the cortisol levels of our patients treated with ayahuasca were regulated 2 days after dosing session. We also assessed the levels of the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the BDNF. The BDNF is a molecule implicated in depression and also that also plays a role in neuroplasticity. And we found that 2 days after dosing, the levels of BDNF were increased in the patients of ayahuasca group. Interesting, this increase was also correlated with the reduction in depressive symptoms. More recent, we also evaluated changes in inflammatory biomarkers that are also related to depression. And for example, here we see the levels of the C-reactive protein that are at the first moment at the baseline before dosing. This level were increased in patients with depression compared to a control group. Again, we looked to these levels 2 days after dosing, and we observed that patients in the ayahuasca group had decreased levels when compared to baseline. Again, a correlation was found between the decrease in CRP levels and the improvement in depression severity. Aside this group of patients, we also had 50 healthy volunteers that were submitted to the same experimental protocol. So here in this work, what we did was to look to use resting state fMRI, task-free fMRI, to evaluate some resting state networks 1 day before and 1 day after the dosing with ayahuasca or placebo. What we found was that ayahuasca can provoke changes in both the salience and the default mode networks 1 day after dosing. And again, interestingly, we found that what was happening during the session, so the acute effects, had a correlation with this subacute effect in the changes in brain connectivity. So here we look for the changes in affect as measured by this hallucinogenic rating scale during the session. And we found this positive correlation with changes in the functional connectivity in the salience and default mode network. Although these finds are from this health group of individuals, it's important to note that both DMN and salience network are altered in depression. So this result can also impact the therapeutic benefits we are seeing. So to sum this up, what we can conclude from this trial is that ayahuasca has a rapid and sustained antidepressant effect that lasted for 7 days. Biochemical markers and brain functional connectivity are modulated by ayahuasca 1 day and 2 days after dosing. And these mechanisms could help to explain what we are seeing as this therapeutic antidepressant effect. I want to thank you, the patients. Thank you also. This is part of the team. And thank you. And I'm open to further questions.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, for the beautiful presentation. We have a couple of questions, but the first question I would like to ask is, ayahuasca is a mixture of different molecules and different plants, of course. So, and you have the beta-carbolines, the harmine, the harmaline, and you have the DMT, and probably many other compounds in there that might create some synergistic effects to create the antidepressant effects. So, do you have any thoughts about what specific parts of the plant? And of course, it's very logical to assume that it's the synergy between all the molecules and all the whole plant together. But what do you think about that yourself?
So it's a hard question, and yeah, we have no, I don't know any clinical study that made separated like only DMT or the beta carbolines. What I know is from some animal models studies that use only harmine to see if that has an antidepressant effect, for example, and they found some antidepressant effect in this animal model, rat models, using only harmine. Also, we can have some insights from these brain organoids studies that have shown that harmine also has this neuroplasticity effect. Then we know that neuroplasticity is possible mechanism to helping to alleviating the depressive symptoms. And also I think that yeah, I don't know. It's hard to see to answer this question when we know that maybe it's this unique mixture that are having this effect. And also I don't mention here, but as Milan told in his presentation, we had all these psychological, as like we know that it's all molecular at an end, but we also have to look for this more psychological and subjective effect that I don't mention here in my presentation, but which I think that has a huge role in this therapeutic effect. So it's hard to reduce what we are seeing in only the pharmacological components. It's really
Right.
hard for.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah, I understand. So I think this also relates to some discussion that was going on in the chat And some people have criticisms, for example, around the use of ayahuasca compared to the plant-based ayahuasca, which is maybe in the end a very different brew, actually. But other people say, why would that be an issue, actually? Because psilocybin, for example, has been extracted from the mushrooms, and mescaline has been extracted from the cacti, and those are being used in the more Western context as well. So there are different opinions on this. And do you have any thoughts around that yourself? What do you think, for example, about ayahuasca? Because you might be able to study some of the effects more kind of clearly because you know exactly what is in there. But do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think like thinking about science, I think it's the way we have to study something is to reduce the problem, trying to isolate any part of it and looking deeply in this part. But so this can be the case of ayahuasca. It's can be logic to have like if I know that the most of the effects came from DMT and beta carboline, could be an easy way to only put this together and isolated this pharmacological mixture to better understand what is this effect. But on the other hand, I think it's complicated to call this ayahuasca or to compare the two, because we have like with ayahuasca, we mentioned like these 3 alkaloids that are the most the higher concentration in ayahuasca, but we know that that's a lot of other components we are not measuring. So I think it's as the case of cannabis, when we have this entourage effect with a lot of things we are missing when you isolate the components and try to apply only them. Right. But yeah, I think it's maybe we can study both, I think, but maybe not call or attribute the same power of ayahuasca to this ayahuasca.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Makes sense. Yeah. So also I think to complicate it even more, of course, there's many molecules and different plants, and then of course there's also the ritual in the original context, and the whole setting. So there's also a question around what psychotherapeutic framework has been used in your study, and how about preparation and integration. So I think also that relates to what was the kind of container or the setting in which the ayahuasca was used in this study.
Right. So this study was a little bit different from this psychotherapy-assisted psilocybin study we had listened here, because we didn't had some directed psychotherapy during the process. What we did, yes, we did had this kind of ritual, but was a more intuition-based, I think. So one thing I didn't mention was that all the patients were naive to ayahuasca. This was an important thing, because we know that it's had a placebo with a psychedelic substance. It's really a hard thing to have. And also because ayahuasca has this very particular flavor and odor. So it's so one thing we did to address this issue of the placebo was that all patients were naive. So we one day before the dosing session, we talked to them. So in order to explain all this gamma of effects they could experience from nothing, from feeling nothing to feeling a lot of different feelings and perceptions, and yeah. So this was a kind of preparation session. We did this the day before and also just before the intake. And during the intake, I was there all the time, also with Hidraulio, which is the principal investigator of this research. For almost all the sessions, were the 2 of us seated like in a room next to the patient, but not in the same room. And also we had this music playlist, which we had we can, if you are interested, you can find this on Spotify. I think it's Ayahuasca playlist by Toffoli, which are also watching here. And so we had like this music playlist. We also adopt something that's common in the churches that use ayahuasca, which is before the session, they ask people to have an intention. Mm-hmm. So this intention can be since a question, so a desire, I don't know, something that they want to, can be like a guideline from the session. So we also had this. And then after the session, we had a conversation when we asked the participant to tell us how it was the experience, what they feel. So again, this worked like an integration session. Mm-hmm. And we did also this in the next morning, before night, they sleep. We asked again how they were feeling, if they had some insights or, yeah. So we had this preparation, integration, but in a more flexible way.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much. I think there are many more questions to ask, and there are a lot of interesting things to investigate more. And I think you're all doing really great work there. But we have to stop right now, so we cannot continue here live. But you can go if you want, if you're open to it. There is a link in the chat, and also in your email there should be a link to the after talk, so you can join there with other people that might want to continue the discussion. So thank you very much for your talk. Also, thanks a lot to Milan again for his talk. And now we have a little break for around 8 minutes, and then we have the two final sessions coming up. And the first one is medicalizing psychedelics. It will be a panel. And the other one is globalization of ayahuasca, economy, ethics, and politics. So those are, I think, also very interesting topics to end the conference with. And then, of course, afterwards, we have a closing session as well. So thank you all very much. Looking forward to see you again. And thank you very much again for your presentation, Fernanda.
Thank you, Irving.
All right. See you.
Bye-bye. See you.